My husband knocked on my door 2 years after he died and said I can explain. Wesley and I had been married for 7 years when he died in a car accident on a business trip. The police called me at 6 in the morning and said his rental car had gone off a cliff in Montana and the body was too burned to identify that. They found his wallet and his wedding ring in the wreckage, 29, with a 4-year-old old and a 6-year-old old, and my whole world collapsed in a single phone call. His parents flew in for the funeral and I gave a eulogy through tears. My oldest tugged my dress at the burial and said, "Mommy." When his daddy coming back, I knelt down and said, "He's not coming back, baby. He's in heaven now," she said, but I didn't get to say goodbye. I held her while she and promised myself I would hold our family together no matter what. I got a second job to support the girls and went to therapy twice a week. My therapist said, "You're doing incredibly well for someone who lost their partner so suddenly." I said, "I don't have a choice. My girls need me to be okay." I learned how to be a single mother and how to fix things around the house. When the kitchen sink broke, my neighbor offered to help and I said no, thank you. I need to learn how to do this myself. My youngest started having nightmares about car accidents and I would hold her and say, "You're safe, mommy's here, nothing bad is going to happen to you." Around the 18-month mark, my therapist said, "I think you're ready to start living again." I said, "I think so too." Then 3 weeks ago, I heard a knock at my door at 9 at night while the girls were asleep. I opened the door and my dead husband's and was standing on my porch. And I screamed so loud my neighbor's lights turned on. Wesley held up his hands and said, "I know this is a shock, but I can explain everything." I couldn't speak because he looked exactly the same except for a beard and longer hair. He said, "Can I come in?" I said, "You're dead." He said, "I know it looks that way, but I had to disappear because it was the only way." I said, "The only way to do what he said, to claim what's rightly mine." I said, "Wesley, what the hell are you talking about?" He pulled out his phone and showed me some website about European royalty and said I took a DNA test 2 years ago and it showed I'm directly descended from the Austrian royal family. I'm a Habsburg, and I have a legitimate claim to restore titles and land. I stared at him and he kept going. He said I couldn't pursue it as a regular American with a family, so I had to shed my old identity. I staged the accident and went to Europe to prove my lineage. I said, "You let me think you were dead for 2 years because of a DNA test." He said, "It's not just a DNA test, it's my birthright, and I was meant for greatness, and I couldn't let a family hold me back from claiming my throne." I said, "Your throne, Austria, doesn't even have a monarchy anymore." He waved his hand and said, "That's a technicality because there's a movement to restore it, and when they do, I'll be in position." I started laughing and he frowned and said, "Why are you laughing?" I said, "Because you destroyed our entire family for a..." He said, "It's not a fantasy because I have the documents and the proof." I said, "Then why are you, Wesley? Why aren't you in Austria sitting on your throne?" His face changed and he said, "There were complications with the paperwork and I ran out of money, but once I get back on my feet, I'm going back," I said. "And you thought you'd come here to the family you abandoned?" He said, "I thought you'd understand and I thought you'd wait for me." I said, "Wait for you. I thought you were dead." I had to explain to our daughters why daddy was never coming home. His face softened and he said, "How are they? How are my girls?" I said, "They're not your girls anymore." He tried to push past me and said, "I want to see my daughters." I blocked the doorway and said, "You gave them up when you chose a fake crown over them." He said, "I'm their father." I said, "Their father died 2 years ago, and that's what they believe." He started crying and said, "You can't do this to me. Those royal people in Europe didn't accept me and said my documents were forged. But you have to accept me because you're my wife." I said, "I'm your widow. Wesley, there's a death certificate with your name on it, and as far as the law is concerned, you don't exist." He grabbed the door and said, "Please, I have nowhere else to go." I said, "You should have thought about that before you faked your own death to become pretend royalty." I closed the door in his face. Wesley is under investigation for insurance fraud, and I told my daughters the truth. They said they let like him better when he was dead.